Welcome to the Simply Real Life podcast. I'm Sarah, the founder of Simply Real Health, here to help you simplify, amplify, and elevate your life. This show is for those of you who want the real talk on how to live a more intuitive and intentional life, a life that's healthy from the inside out, and one that feels more effortless, aligned, simple, and more alive. We cover it all, from health, wellness, mindset, motherhood, daily habits and rituals, to business and relationships, creativity and growth, and tiny tricks to feeling your best, and the energetics behind it all filled with personal stories, unfiltered conversations, and of course, answering all of your burning questions, all in the way of simplicity and keeping it real, so that you can create your own version of your healthiest life. Let's do it. Hi guys, welcome back. So I know what you're probably thinking, like, when are we going to get to these questions? The answer is really soon. But before I dive into those, it's probably important to understand some of the background and where I'm coming from, really the perspective that I have and hold, especially when it comes to food and a great relationship to food, which is something I did not have for so many decades of my life. And so before I jump in and just start answering questions, it's probably going to be helpful for you to understand my own personal story, especially when it comes to food and to health and the journey that it's been. So you can understand why I answer certain questions different ways and the perspective that I always have. So if you're ready for some real talk, here we go. Here's my story coming from somebody who had a very terrible relationship to food and therefore to myself, to somebody who now loves food and sees it as this beautiful part of life and this tool that really enables me to live my life on my own terms and create the life that I want and one that feels aligned to me and free and peaceful and calm, all of which are things I never, ever used to have. It's also the story of how I found real food and how that moment actually changed everything in my life and what that felt like, what the process looked like. So I'm really just going to take you a deep dive today. Growing up, I grew up in a very actually healthy family. My parents, bless their hearts, were hippies in college, and they both got into, eating healthy back then, back in the day. And that looked like a lot of, like vegetables were a very normal part of our life. We worked out as a family. I remember them going to the gym, and it was all done in such a positive way. I really got to shout out my parents for this. They really set the stage for what it looked like eating vegetables was a normal thing. Granted, back then we all thought butter was bad, so they didn't taste great, but it was a normal part of life. And I really had great examples. They talked about, these are healthy foods. We would go to the crunchy natural food store. There was only one. We had to drive 30 minutes away. So I really grew up best case scenario, you would say. However, I also grew up in the time where fad diets were the thing. They were it was like a new thing almost coming out of people talking about their health and talking about, heart disease, and everything was kind of just starting to come out around health and fitness. And that became an actual thing that people were talking about, whereas before it was something maybe done quietly or on the side or in smaller communities, but not as mainstream. So being, aware people and conscious people, my parents, were learning about that stuff. They're always learning and growing, and I get a lot of that from them. And so it started to sort of impact, what we were buying and just talking about. And I'm talking about this is elementary school, middle school age, where it was we buy this instead of that because it's a little bit healthier. Or, even the things and meals that my mom would cook, it was very simple. And again, no spices, no salt, no butter, none of that, because back then, again, it was all known as bad. So growing up, what I ate was not a lot of meat, because again, they were both vegetarians in college, and they started to incorporate more chicken and fish and turkey as me and my sister were born. But again, a lot of the basis of what we were eating was a lot of grains. They didn't know about processed versus unprocessed grains. So it's a lot of pasta and, tomato sauce and not a lot of meat, not a lot of things high in fat, things high in sugar. So it was very much I'm sure some of you will relate to this, like just the specific time that we grew up, people were just starting to learn and think about their health. But by the time I got to high school, I was going through that, extremely awkward phase that I think most of us have, except mine was extremely long. Mine was all the way through middle school and then at least half of high school. And I started getting really really interested in health and just wanting to learn more about it. And I was asking for to read nutrition textbooks for fun. What a weird kid. I loved going to the grocery store. I loved picking things out. I loved thinking that I was being healthy. I really had this deep desire to want to be healthy, just somewhere innately in me. And I just really dove into that process. I was reading diet books for fun. I would look and read and get as much info as I could from magazine subscriptions. And I got really into working out, which was always, seen as a healthy thing. But looking back now, I can kind of see it a little bit more clearly that because I was in that phase of just awkward and not comfortable in my body and it was changing and I developed way faster than all of my friends. So I was in this body that felt like a woman's body from a very early age. And it started to just feel uncomfortable. And that desire for all the information on health and thinking about workouts and becoming more serious and studying it, I know that there was some aspect of it that was not just only pure and innocent. I knew, looking back now, I don't think I really knew this then, but that I was trying to grasp, for control and trying to, figure out this body that I was in and how did I feel best in it and what kinds of foods did that look like. And so I started testing all these different diets. I would use myself as a guinea pig. I would be trying and experimenting. And bless my parents' heart, they kind of let me go. They were like, this is, a great thing. Maybe she'll be a doctor and maybe she'll want to be a nutritionist. And it was always kind of seen as a positive thing, I think, until it took a turn where I became just so obsessive about it. I started to really, really start trying and testing these things. And soon I was working out, an hour and a half every single day. And if I didn't do that workout, I felt horrible. I felt horrible about myself. I felt like I wasn't being healthy. I was so inundated with all of the rules, the right way and the wrong way, which by the way, changed every year as new studies came out. And so I had all of this noise in my head and confusion. I was just constantly striving and looking for the one perfect way to eat, the one perfect way to work out so that I'd never have to think about it again. And then I'd be happy, and then I'd be satisfied. And then I'd feel like I was doing a good enough job. And again, all of this to me back then was normal. I did not think twice about this. I did not think that maybe this was a little obsessive or a little much or a little crazy. Back then, also, health and wellness was not a thing that people were interested in. So me, wanting to know and being very particular about what I was eating for lunch that I brought to high school was a weird thing. My friends were like, what? Just eating Otis Spunkmeyer cookies and bags of Doritos like normal high schoolers. And I was that most people thought of as very weird. But to me, that was just what you did if you wanted to be healthy. That's what living a healthy life looked like. It looked like missing out on social events or occasions, even as a high schooler, because I was nervous that there wouldn't be something healthy enough for me to eat. I'm talking about sleepovers. I'm talking about going to the movies with friends. I'm talking about all of the normal things that kids do. I had this constant talk track in my head of fear building around being healthy enough and this obsession around wanting to be the healthiest that I could be, but not realizing that it was taking this very sort of intense and edgy turn. It got to the point where I would just want to bring all of my own food, bring all of my own snacks. I remember having a phase where I would only eat bars. Remember those bars? Luna bars, Power bars. I had a phase of only wanting to eat cereal because then I could measure the calories of it and I knew it was high fiber. And then I had, my phases of only protein and fat-free everything or sugar-free everything. And it was whatever was in in the moment was what I was doing. And everything else became like food to be afraid of, that it wasn't easy to count or measure. I would not touch, full fat milk or 2% milk. I was like, everything was non-fat. I drank lots of coffee. I had, just so many foods that I look at now and I'm like, what was I doing? But again, back then it was normal. It was the best that any of us knew. And at the time, again, this is just in my mind what it took to be healthy. Nowadays, this is a little more common and it has a name to it. And it's very common actually now that wellness and health has become so much of an industry in itself. But again, back then, this was a thing that I really struggled with only internally, only mentally. My friends around me didn't know, other than my obsession with weird, quote unquote, weird food, food that they would never touch. Most of them would not know the amount of anxiety and stress and pressure that I was putting on myself and how guilty I would feel for, quote unquote, messing up or for eating something that was not good or for craving so much sugar. I was always just craving everything and trying to find these ways to trick my body. And that is really, I'm tricking my body. That was my main thing I was focused on. I'm how can I, get the most of this without having any repercussions? So just a very interesting mentality. That I would say that mentality stayed with me all through high school and then into college, where of course I had less control over what I was eating. I lived in a sorority with, hundreds of other women, and we had food that was there, just these mass produced meals that didn't taste very good. And of course didn't fit into my idea of what was healthy. So I ended up always keeping snacks under my bed, the health food snacks and things in the freezer. I think at one point, I even brought in my own mini fridge because I wanted to have my own versions of things. All of this came to a peak when I applied for the study abroad program and was so excited to go to Italy and live there for a couple months. However, I remember the day that I found out that I did actually get in, and everybody else was so excited. And I was going with a few of my girlfriends, and it was going to be so much fun. And we'd heard some of the older girls come back and tell us stories and all of the great food. And immediately, my first thought was panic of oh no, all they have to eat there is pizza and pasta, which all of my friends were yeah, all they have to eat there is pizza and pasta. It's going to be so great. I can't wait. And to drink wine, and it's going to be so amazing and just be in Italy. And I had this panic attack of oh my God, what am I going to do? I know they don't have gyms there. I know they don't have my right protein bars. I know they don't have the right food. They don't measure things. How am I going to read the labels to figure out the protein and the fats and the carbs? And I was panicking so much that I almost didn't go on that trip. And again, I felt like nobody could really understand that. So this is all just quiet conversations I was having with myself in my own head. So I came up with this plan. I packed my suitcase as full as I could of all of my, comfort healthy snacks and thought okay, I'm just going to work out every day when I'm there. And, I did. I really tried to do it. And I got stared at, I got pointed at, I got laughed at for being on a run, for wearing running shoes. It's just all these things that they don't do in a completely different culture. And then there's me, this American girl who was just horrified that there was no gyms, or that they didn't work out, or that there was no such thing as the health food cereal that I was used to, or even things like non-fat milk. It didn't really exist there. Oh my God, I'm thinking about it now, how much energy and effort and time I wasted just trying to repeat the same things that I was doing at home. Meanwhile, missing out on the beauty, right, of another culture, of being somewhere else, of this first time, traveling by myself and being in a different place in the world than my family, than my school, than anything else. I was just missing it, missing the entire point of a trip like studying abroad in another country, because I was so consumed on the inside with health that was how I phrased it to myself. Like, I just want to be healthy. Like, what is wrong with that? And there was one day where I was feeling defeated and, I think had just gone on a run and was by myself and feeling down on myself because I wasn't feeling good and they didn't have the right foods and, probably being really hard and intense on myself. And I remember I sat down to lunch and I just had this moment where I just kind of finally woke up. I finally was like, just started looking around me and observing. I remember seeing so many tables of like Italians and especially Italian women, like meeting each other, meeting their girlfriends for lunch. And I just became fascinated because all of a sudden it occurred to me that even though they did things in such a different way than, the culture that I was from, I started to look around and look, I'm like, wait, they look great. Right? They are beautiful. They have it together here. They are actually enjoying their food. And I started to look at that a little bit more closely. And I remember watching this table of two women and they had their plates of pasta and they had salad and they each had a glass of wine and they were just delighting in it, slowly enjoying it. They weren't doing the American, woman tactics and diet tactics that we hear of, have the waiter take half of your plate of pasta back to the kitchen and box it up, or just eat the salad and don't have any dressing. And it was none of that. And you could tell when they were sitting there, they were so peaceful and so content and just so present with each other and enjoying the day, enjoying the company, just enjoying their life. And I had this moment sitting there looking at them and I remember starting to cry a little bit. I don't think I've ever had a meal like that in my life where I wasn't calculating, where I wasn't, overly obsessing or thinking about how I was going to do a workout later or, feeling guilty the next day or trying to, make it up in some way or somehow. I never had just sat and enjoyed these beautiful pleasures in life because it made me feel stressed and anxious. And I remember just looking around and looking at all of these tables and these people just walking and healthy as could be. They may be eating gelato every day and drinking wine and even smoking cigarettes, but they were so happy in their life and so present. And I thought to myself, that is healthy, living a life where you feel those things and you feel freedom and you feel joy and you feel like you can really be where you are instead of being wrapped up in your own thoughts or obsessions or anxieties or all these things that we create in our head. And I just will always remember that moment. It finally opened my eyes. And from that point forward in the trip, I could not stop watching. I could not stop paying attention to what are they eating? What is the pace of life here? And how does it does work for them. There's not only this one way that I was thinking that it could look like to have this life that felt juicy and alive and vibrant and present. And from that moment on, I really couldn't, I was just obsessed. I would look at people in the grocery store. I'd see what they were buying. I would see how they shopped. And all of a sudden it occurred to me that they don't have any of the quote unquote healthy stuff, yet they are probably some of the healthiest, happiest people. Their life is about simple food and simple joys and simple pleasures. And I didn't have any of that. So I started as best I could to just start doing what they did, to just start going to the grocery store, a couple times a week, to start looking at more buying produce just at the farmer's stand instead of it needing to be a packaged, processed thing that I knew the calorie count or the protein count or whatever I was paying attention to at the time. I started really having a sip of wine and really tasting what that tasted like and the combination of flavors and breathing when I ate. Also, there's this energetic component to what you're eating and how you're eating it and the mood that you're in and the thoughts you're thinking as you're eating it. These are all things that are so normal in the Italian culture. They grow up thinking that food is nourishment and that it's beautiful and it's this amazing part of life that is nourishing you on all levels. It's about family, and it's about connection, it's about community, it's about feeding your body. It's about respecting your body, respecting the earth, respecting the food and where it comes from. So I started eating like that. and started trying to think more like that. I started noticing that I felt better than I had ever felt before. So this was like really an awakening moment for me in my life that I will never forget. So many other cultures and countries in the world eat real food. And they have these deep rituals and there's a wisdom to it. And it's eating food that has been around for thousands of years and it hasn't changed. It's food that is so easy for our bodies to digest and process and understand and interpret because that's what we've been doing for thousands of years. The stuff that I was eating was like manufactured. It was man-made. It was created to have a certain number on the back of the label, to have marketing on it that says, with these buzzwords that we all think of as like healthy, high protein, low carb, fat free, sugar free. When you look at what it takes to create something like that doesn't exist in nature, it is scary, right? Scary. So when I came home, I had this deep desire to then continue the way that I was learning about food because it just felt so much better. And I had felt this this weight start to lift off my shoulders. Part of me just didn't really believe it, didn't really think that it would work, didn't really think that I could feel better that way. But I also had this tiny inkling of yes, it can. Yes, it can. If they can do it and live that way, why can't you if it feels so much better? So that was the turning point of how I found real food and just started to notice food that had existed for a long amount of time and food that, almost every culture had and eaten for thousands of years, and just started to slowly think about that. I wouldn't say it changed everything right away, but that was the beginning intro point of wow, there's a whole different way to look at food and look at nourishment and look at your health. And maybe it's so much more simple than the way that I was doing things, which was always consumed with, again, these rules and never feeling satisfied. And it was very chaotic and noisy. And there was always this new study, and always I was comparing myself to everybody else, and the sabotage and the stress. It just took up so much mental space, and feeling being healthy was this anxiety producing thing where my body was the enemy. And I was always trying to beat the system, versus switching to a way that looking at food became this oh, it's actually so much easier. It's actually just more simple is better. And I don't know why that was just such a huge revelation to me, that you could actually feel so much better by doing less, by worrying less, by stressing out less, by being less anxious. And the more I started to learn about real food, I started to realize that everything I thought I knew about what was healthy food was completely backwards and wrong. And to the point where I became so disturbed by this, where I realized, wait, it's all just marketing. It's all just these, the dairy industry is funded in certain ways to make the food pyramid say that we need to eat a certain number of servings. I'm dating myself again with the food pyramid, but again, you should understand the concept. The things that we were being taught for people who were even wanting to know about being healthy were very just backwards, and not necessarily true. So the more I started to realize that, the more I realized, wait a second, I've been putting all this time and energy and effort into these things that's maybe not even good for me. Maybe that's been the problem of why I never feel great. I never feel like I've arrived. I never feel satisfied. I always feel like this is an uphill battle, because maybe I've actually been doing this all wrong. So it got me angry, and I was very frustrated. And it really started this whole journey of starting what is real food? What's the difference between real food and quote unquote healthy food? Because there's actually a huge difference. And realizing that changed my life. I'm not joking. All of a sudden, when I started to look at what is in this food, is it natural? Is it normal? Is it simple? When I looked at the actual ingredients, which by law are required by every food company, I knew that foods that didn't have labels on it at all were definitely real food. But I'm talking about all the stuff that's kind of in the middle of the grocery store and not the perimeter. I started to look more closely at it, even the stuff that I'm well, duh, this is healthy. Of course it's healthy. Like it has this, it's, has all this bragging on the front of the label. It has, the right components of like, this is a health food. But when you look at what's actually in it, it can be so disturbingly different than the message that's printed on the front. So the minute I started to learn to like look at the label, is it something that doesn't take me 10 minutes to read? Because if it does, I'll just put it back and look for a different option here. But it just started to shift my entire focus and the entire way I looked at food, the entire way I thought about just being healthy was like, wow, you really have to fight for yourself here. You really have to like get educated. You really have to be empowered enough to learn that it's not just the stuff that we're being fed and convinced of because there's money to be made in the diet industry and eating all those foods in a certain way, fund a lot of food industries and the packaged food industry and the processed food industry. So really becoming like your own advocate for that. When I started looking at labels, it was like the grocery store all of a sudden just like opened up. Like all of a sudden there was all these foods that I had been avoiding for most of my life, including things like butter and full fat milk and cream and, even like different sources of meat where I was thinking, in the past had done things where like meat free was better and vegan was better. Being a vegetarian was healthier. And, starting to look at like, well, if the quality and sourcing was good and if it was something that sounded good to my body, that is actually a real food. And so just as an example, like even things like ice cream, where in the past I maybe would have felt bad or guilty or feeling like it was such a treat or indulgence or something that I would then want to work off later, became something of like, well, is it made with simple ingredients? There's plenty of options looking at things like ice cream that have, 3 to 4 ingredients that are very simple and normal and therefore so much kinder on your body. So as I started to go through the grocery store, it was like, wow, wait, there's so many options now. Like there's so many different, like beautiful, real food, like foods that fill you up, foods that are, nourishing and comforting. And this is not about diet food. This is not about like trying to get away with anything. This is not about restricting yourself. This is about like, there is so much out there. And that's really what started getting me more interested in cooking. Because now that I realized what was going on, I became so much more like, okay, this can't be that hard. If simple is better, when food is fresh and it's real, it tastes great. You don't have to do that much to food that already is fresh and simple and amazing and real. And that's really what started, again, like this interest in cooking or this interest in like taking more ownership and responsibility in how I was feeding myself. But it was from a very different mentality than I had ever done in the past. It was so much more based in like, I want to treat my body with respect. I want to feed myself the best possible. I want to feel nourished. I want to feel energized. Like I want to feel like I'm not craving stuff. I want to feel like I'm not hungry all the time. I want to feel like I don't have these annoying aches and pains and the migraines that I used to get and like really bad cramps and really bad periods and just the mood swings and how mean I was to myself. All of that started to lift the more I started eating real food. And as my default, the better I started to feel. And then something even more amazing started to happen was that not only in just my day-to-day normal life, I was starting to feel better, but that also it opened up so many more opportunities for me to really live my life, like go on vacations and take trips and do more social stuff without worrying about, what's the calorie count on this? Or is this good or bad? Or I can't measure this. All when you're starting to think about, is it real or not real? Is it unprocessed food or is it processed? Is it something that somebody can make by hand in a kitchen? That opens up so many different options for when you go out to eat. Right? They're using fresh ingredients. Somebody's cooking it by hand. Again, that it can vary a little bit depending what type or the quality of the restaurant you're going to. But in general, there is so much less fear and so much less to be afraid of. And there's so many more options to eat and enjoy and play with and love and just really sink into your life in such a more like deep, satisfying way. And I began to realize like, wow, I used to have a terrible relationship to food. You guys, this was something I didn't even know until I saw and experienced what it was like to have a better relationship to food. and how having this freedom and this joy around food and this peace and this ease and this confidence of like knowing how to look at food and read the ingredients and choose foods based on how they made me feel and, you know, how nourishing they were for me, it changed everything. And when my relationship to food started getting better and I was just experiencing all these things in life without guilt, it changed my relationship to myself. And it's probably easy to tell the rest of the story from there. But the minute that I had that massive shift, it was life-changing for me. And I knew that I wanted to spend the rest of my life helping other people learn this difference between real food and learn the power of real food over processed food, packaged food, health food. You know, all the stuff we're marketed to is not necessarily serving us in multiple ways in our bodies physically, but also mentally and emotionally and spiritually, and what it means to be healthy and have a great relationship to food and to yourself means having it feel free and easy and more intuitive and trusting and feeling like you can do things that are, you know, out of love and respect and really have this, you know, this weight lifted off your shoulders of knowing the best foods for you, what make you feel good from the inside and out, but also letting go of all of that mental talk to yourself and the fear and the guilt and the shame, the self-sabotage, all of that. It all left the building, you know, when I started thinking about things in a much more simple way. And that has become my mission to this day, that drive and that passion to want to teach others about real food because it is so missing from our society and from our culture. And just feeling like, wow, what would that be like to go through life, even from a much earlier age, never having to deal with all of that other stuff, to have your health feel like it can be easy and approachable and simple and something that you can fully immerse yourself in this beautiful and rich life. And that is always where it starts, is how you're feeding yourself, how you're treating yourself. And knowing that it can be as simple as that is just the most freeing thing I had ever experienced, and is why with everything that I do, the cookbooks and blog and cooking club and sharing the recipes that do make it easy to do this in real life when things are busy, I can't imagine living my life the way I was before with that load and carrying that load around the rest of my life versus the way I live now, which does feel so aligned and intuitive. And I really can feel this like connection point between having a much more intentional life, like knowing how I want to feel and doing the things that serve my body and really just operating in this entirely different way. In my mind, this is how life is supposed to feel. And so when I talk about health and having a healthy life, this is always the perspective that I'm coming from, that it's not just about your physical health, although I do believe that it all starts there. I do believe that it starts with your food because the food impacts directly how you feel. It impacts directly the cells of your body. It impacts directly your digestion, your mood, your energy, your patience. It impacts your emotions. It impacts the clarity that you feel. Like it impacts how well you can be connected to your body, how quiet you can be to listen to what your body's saying, because it's always talking to us. It's always changing. You know, there is no one right way to eat, but I do believe that with real food, everything else gets easier. That when you simplify your food, you can simplify your life. And when you simplify your life, you are able to amplify it and elevate it to feel the best in your life that you can feel, which enables you to go out in the world and serve more people and help more people, whether that's in the context of your family or your work or your creative, passions in life. It's all connected and it all comes back to food, in my opinion. And that is what I really want for you, is to have this life that's full of life-giving things and experiences, and helping you just live a little bit more simply and intentionally, because I think that's what helps us live a more beautifully and aligned and vibrant life in all aspects. I want you to have a life that feels like it's very easy to go with the flow of life, whether that's, changes in the actual season or changes in the weather, or it's changes in your own life season. and all of the different transitions that we go throughout our lives, that we can always come back to ourselves and to food that makes us feel good and to the experiences that really fill us up all across the board. That it's not about right or wrong. It's not about living with this old mentality that I used to have of just being very all or nothing, like very extreme. That's not how real life works. It's why most diets just don't work, and we're not able to maintain them over the course of time because they get in the way of real life. When it's busy, when you need to go with the flow, it's almost impossible to live like that with that standard of perfection, and then feeling sad when we fall anything short of that. So in the context of this podcast and in my work and in my mission, it is always my mission to free you and to help you see the areas where you may be holding on to some of those kind of old, outdated, rigid, all or nothing mentalities when it comes to our food, when it comes to how we feed ourselves, how we treat ourselves, and the way that we move through our lives. So I hope in sharing this part of my story and journey in this way, will really help you see the perspective that I have and hold, and what I'm always trying to help others with as well, in their own lives. So as the questions start to come in, and if there's things related to food or things not related to food, just know that I'm always having the perspective of wanting us to live lives that are less extreme and less rigid and less all or nothing, and a little bit more welcoming of all that is there for us and the wide expanse of what that means. And that your health is, yes, your physical health and how you feel in your physical body, but it's also so deeply connected to your mental health and the thoughts that you're thinking and the way that you talk to yourself and the emotions that we feel. There's such a deep connection between our food and the emotions, and whether we're using food to cope with emotions, or we've been kind of culturally taught and trained these things, or grew up with certain ways of thinking around food and what it was used for in our own families, and just starting to clear the slate. So this week, I would just encourage you to start looking around in your own life. Start looking at the things that you kind of eat and do and just buy out of habit, and just maybe turn it around and start to educate yourself. Start to look at what is in your food. What are the ingredients there? Is it simple, normal, natural? Or is it something that maybe next time you do go to the store, you can look for something that's just as easy? It's just sitting right next to it on the shelf. Or different ways to think about, like, what is my relationship to food like? Does it feel peaceful and joyful and easy and effortless? Or does it feel like this struggle all the time? And knowing that the more you lean into the things that are pure and simple and real, so much of a burden that can lift, right? Off your mental state, off your emotional state, and definitely off of your physical self as well. Thank you guys so much for being here and listening. And I promise we will get right into the questions in the next episode. And if you have any questions that you'd like to submit, just come find me on Instagram at Simply Real Health, and you can send me a DM, or we will always be posting the weekly question box where we'll be capturing all of these questions so we can do full episodes on the ones that need a deeper dive. Thanks so much, you guys. I love you so much. I hope you have a great rest of your week. If you enjoyed this episode and want more like it, make sure you're subscribed to the Simply Real Life podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, and maybe share it with a friend or two. That would mean the world.